Hello and welcome to another Arsecast Extra, as always, with James from Gunnerblog. James, good morning to you.
Morning, Andrew. How you doing?
I'm all right. Not the best weekend, fair to say, from a footballing perspective.
Nope. But lots to discuss, I suppose.
Lots to discuss, and there is obviously a big story breaking, or has broken open this morning, about Edu, about his departure from the club, his decision to leave the club and perhaps going somewhere else. So we're aware of that, and I think the best way for us to do this is to sort of leave it to part two, because there have been some questions about it. We can go with a question and talk about what we know and what the situation is and what might transpire, but to sort of compartmentalize it from part one, where we're going to talk about the game. I think the two things need to be kind of different, because they're, the game was terrible, and we need to do that in depth. And then I think we do need to give some focus to this Edu story, because he is a significant figure at the club. He's the sporting director, only appointed sporting director less than 2 years ago. So for him to decide to go is pretty seismic news.
Yes, and it's true. Just a spoiler alert, to stop people being in suspense. It's true.
Yes.
So we will talk about it in due course. But I think you're right. This is a game. Some games you might be like, we'll start with that. We'll just do all the Edu stuff up top. But I think this is a game that does warrant some serious attention. It
does, because I think, as I said to you on Saturday, I think this was Arsenal's worst performance of the season by some distance. Mm-hmm. By a country mile, this was the worst I think we've played. And, there've been good days and not so good days so far this season, but I think there's always been perhaps an explanation or a reason, or even if it hasn't been brilliant, we've done enough to kind of get through. But this was the first time, I think, this season that we absolutely deserved nothing from the game because of the way we played, maybe because of the way we set up, and we can talk about that a little bit as well, but just did not cause Newcastle any problems whatsoever. And it was, I think, a very, very frustrating and disappointing day for everybody.
Yeah, and we've had a few at St James's Park in recent years, haven't we? I mean, it's not an easy place to go, but this is a Newcastle who haven't been in amazing form. I don't think this is the Newcastle of a couple of years ago, the Newcastle who, made their way into the Champions League or anything like it. So a really disappointing day. And I think a day, for much of this season, we've had excuses, and some of them have been more than excuses. They've been reasons, they've been justifiable explanations. But I think this is a day where we don't have too many of those. I agree. Let's start with the starting lineup then. Thomas Partey played at right back. Jurrien Timber played at left back. We had Gabriel back in the side. That was good. We had Rice and Marino, Trossard, Saka, Martinelli, Havertz. And I have to say, I didn't like it. I don't really understand why we play Thomas Partey at right back in this game. Now, I'm not being critical of him, because usually when he plays there, he's fine. Last week against Liverpool, I thought he was excellent against two very strong opponents, Luis Diaz and Cody Gakpo. He played really, really well at right back. But I thought what Arteta said afterwards was a little disingenuous. When he was asked about Partey in his press conference, he said, I didn't think he struggled, and I think that's right, but we had to play him there because Ben White wasn't fit, which was, the only reason why we had to play Thomas Partey at right back. It sort of ignored the fact that he had three options at left back. Jakub Kiwior, Alexander Zinchenko, and Miles Lewis-Skelly. Now, all of them, I think, are players who I can understand why the manager had a little bit of pause for thought, right? Zinchenko hasn't really played very much, and when he came on, he was pretty bad. Lewis-Skelly, 18 years of age, being repurposed into a left back. A difficult away game to throw him into, I guess, if you're looking for explanations. And Kiwior, had a mistake against Bournemouth, but that was playing on the right side of centre half. I just felt like we didn't pick
a balanced team in this game, because I think Timber at right back is far better than he is at left back. I think Partey in midfield is better than he is at right back. And I'm not saying that explains everything, but it was... Do you think it sort of fed into a slightly conservative approach from Arteta going into this game?
Maybe. I'm with you. Like, we spoke about this on WhatsApp, that Mikel's point about the fullbacks doesn't quite stand up to scrutiny.
No.
But I think he probably looked at the first half performance against Liverpool and thought, that was pretty good. You know, if we can replicate that. I think conservative is one way of putting it. I think he thought about this from a physical perspective. I think he looked at the Newcastle 11 and wanted to go big and strong. And, you know, I think that probably would have counted against a Zinchenko or maybe even a Miles Lewis-Skelly. I think he wanted Rice in midfield. He wanted Marino in midfield. He wanted to combat Joelinton and Willock and, you know, all Newcastle's power in that part of the pitch. I mean, I suppose you could say that Partey would be an obvious way of doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting that desire to go at them physically is at odds with what he said a couple of seasons ago when he went to Newcastle, where he said, if you want to play them at a physical game, you're not gonna beat them at that, more or less. And he decided in that game.
That's what we found out at the weekend.
Yeah, and he decided to play Jorginho rather than Thomas Partey to give us something a little bit different, a little bit more technicality. So, you know, maybe it's changed, obviously, when you do have a Declan Rice, when you do have Mikel Merino, when you do have Kai Havertz, when you do have Thomas Partey, and you can play them all together, maybe you feel a bit more confident about your desire to match Newcastle physically. But, you know, what he said afterwards was Newcastle, I can't remember exactly, but, they played the game the way they wanted to, or they made us play a particular kind of game, which was physical, and it was drawing free kicks, and it was stop-start, and it was disrupting any rhythm as much as we had any rhythm in the first place. But, you know, that sort of battle of the giants kind of idea, it does stray a little bit from some of the principles that he had not that long ago.
That's a really interesting point. And I think actually, you know, if you look at what's happened in the 2 years or whatever it is since those comments, I mean, the profile of the squad has changed, and it's moved towards a more physical one, really. I mean, we've got very tall, athletic players in the squad now. So maybe Mikel felt that we were in a place that we could kind of take the fight to Newcastle. It didn't pan out that way. And I know you mentioned Jorginho there, and there's a lot of questions and a lot of things to discuss off the back of this game. But something I really think when looking almost at the last, I don't know what it's been, 6 months or so, it's very curious to me that Jorginho was given a new deal at a point in time where he kind of played himself into the first team, and that we've seen quite so little of him.
Yeah.
Certainly in the big games since then.
Yeah.
That is curious, don't you think?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think he... obviously has some limitations when it comes to, let's say covering ground. The sort of, the legs aren't quite what they were, but I think there's enough game intelligence there for him to have been involved a little bit more than we've seen so far this season. I mean, he does have a shiny new toy in Mikel Merino, who's come in this summer. And, I think to be completely fair to him, he is still getting up to speed. With life at Arsenal, he had that injury, and this is his fourth appearance, something like that in the team. So it's hard to properly judge. But yeah, like you, I'm a little bit surprised that we haven't seen a bit more of Jorginho. But it seems as soon as Partey was fully fit and available to Mikel Arteta, he went with him. All at the end of last season, even the start of this season, where I think, his performances weren't always brilliant. Yeah, it is odd. It is odd.
But yeah, I think Tim maybe tweeted about this after the game, but was there a degree to which we sort of sacrificed too much technical ability.
Yeah.
You know, in not playing one of Jorginho or Zinchenko or...
Well, definitely not Zinchenko. You know, I think I know what you're saying. Like on paper, yes. In practice and in reality at this moment in time, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But I know where the point is, because you don't have Odegaard. You have Havertz doing a specific job in this team in the absence of Martin Odegaard, which, you know, I think he's very willing to try and do, but maybe isn't really playing to his strengths. So, yeah, there is a sort of lack of technical ability, technical security, the ability to find passes and to be incisive in the way that we play. Like they can all pass it sideways and backwards. We all know that. Every player can, but it's what you do with it in the final third, where there just wasn't really enough of that. Or when we did try and make those passes, they weren't accurate enough to cause Newcastle any problems.
Yeah, and you know, Declan Rice playing at the base of midfield, it's sort of an interesting discussion around him, isn't it? I mean, I think he's obviously a brilliant player and a good passer of the ball, but is he as good a passer as Jorginho? Perhaps not. So yeah, I think there's a lot you could look at in the lineup and say, did we approach this the right way? I'm trying to remember when we did win at Newcastle, not last year but the year before, 1-0, wasn't it? I think
was it 1-0 or 2-1? I can't remember.
2-1. I can't remember. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that there was an own goal in that game which made it 2-1. I'll just have a quick look while you're talking. But go on.
Yeah. But I think Zinchenko played that day. And I seem to remember that he had, you know, it was a classic Zinchenko performance, that he had some issues defensively, maybe up against Jacob Murphy on that right-hand side. But he also helped us control the ball and control possession, and maybe we just didn't do enough of that. Not necessarily that he is the solution, but that we didn't have those solutions on the pitch. I think it's interesting as well that it's always interesting what teams do against you. I found it fascinating that Newcastle put Anthony Gordon on the right-hand side. He plays a lot of football from the left for them and played from the right in this game, and they won the match from that channel. I do think that there is a kind of structural issue around our left-back area, and teams increasingly do look to exploit that. You know, Liverpool's goal came in that channel. All right, different personnel this time, but again, Newcastle's goal comes from that side.
I wonder why they made that decision. Did they look at the team and think it would be Timber? Or did they look at it and think
it was going to be
like one of the...
or Lewis Skelly? Or, I don't know. Whatever the reasoning, it worked for them.
Yeah, I know hindsight is 2020, but I don't think with Timber at right back and any one of those three options at left back, we could have been any worse than we were in this game. And like you say, the goal did come from that side. I think when you look at any goal that you concede, you can always find things that you could have done better. Mm-hmm. To what extent do you think that's true of this goal? They kept saying on television, sometimes you get done by the perfect goal. And look, the delivery, the first time cross is superb. The header is brilliant from Isak. I do think when you look at it, though, maybe Thomas Partey's defensive header is not great. It sort of goes into an area straight to a Newcastle player. They move it quickly. And I think our two central defenders, Isak runs off the back of Gabriel, drifts off the back of him. I think Saliba can see it. I know there might be other players there, but I think he's got to try at least and disrupt Isak in that moment, and is just a little bit flat-footed. I know it all happens very quickly and, you know, in slow motion and replays, and we can see what we could have done, but how do you view the goal from a defensive perspective? Because I don't think there's any doubt that the quality of the goal from a Newcastle perspective is right up there.
Yeah, I've got to be honest and say, like, my initial reaction was kind of in line with the TV coverage. I just thought, wow, great delivery, great header. I was even looking at the goalkeeper and being like, can you get there? And I don't think you can. I just think it's brilliant execution all round from Newcastle. But having spoken to you about it and having read your blog, I think, of course, there'll be things that Mikel Arteta will wish we'd done differently. The back line gets a bit ragged in that moment, doesn't it? Because Partey sort of tucks round almost into the central area. And I feel like we don't ever quite recover our spacing properly. But, you know, from their perspective, they did everything right. It's just, it's one of those. And the thing is, you can't be perfect in the Premier League. There's going to be games where you concede goals. Plenty of them if you're this Arsenal team this season. But what you need to do is have a game that gives you a platform to recover that situation. And I think what's frustrating is that once we went behind, it never really felt like that. You know, it was the perfect. We speak about it being a game that Newcastle wanted it to be in terms of it being a bit of a scrap and very physical in the midfield, but also as integral to their game plan would be going ahead. And once they got that, you know, we were really up against it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the features of this Arsenal team in recent seasons has been a measure of resilience and ability to respond to setbacks in game and not in game. And I think when you concede in the 14th minute, it's far from ideal, obviously, for the reasons that you laid out there when it comes to the way Newcastle play. But you've got loads of fucking time, to get something back, loads of time to, you know, change the dynamic of your own performance. And it became pretty clear pretty quickly that we were really struggling in this game to develop any kind of rhythm or any kind of attacking threat. There were a couple of moments. I know Arteta spoke about a big chance for Mikel Merino. Was that in the first half? I think it might have been.
Yes, it was.
You know, but that was like a corner, and there were a load of people in the way. And I think, you know, all he could do in that situation was hit it and hope for the best. It hit a defender and went away. And the only other bit of attacking threat I can really remember in that first half where we might have had an opportunity is Saka making a run into the Newcastle box. I think there's a pass there for Trossard to make, which I would expect him to be able to pull off, and he didn't. He overhit that pass in a big way, and that went begging. And there just wasn't anything about the performance. You get to halftime, you're thinking, that's not good, but you know, we still have 45 minutes to try and change it. There was just something about the way we played, something in, I don't know, they all looked a little bit hungover. I know they weren't, but if there's a way of describing the performance, it looked like that players just weren't quite at the level that they need to be, collectively and individually.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, there were a couple of other moments in the first half that spring to mind. Bukayo Saka had a headed opportunity, and another one where he sort of shot into the side netting, I think, after Jurriën Timber had like picked up a really interesting position, almost in the centre forward area. But they were, I think, in the first 20 minutes or so of the game. And yeah, the second half was really hard work and really hard going. It was interesting, you know, we speak about TV coverage and their perception. You probably didn't watch the halftime on Sky or whatever it was, but I think it was BT actually, and they were saying, I'd be really surprised. I think it was Joe Cole. So I'd be really surprised if Mikel Arteta doesn't make a change at halftime. And I have to say, I sort of found myself agreeing with that. I know it's not necessarily hugely in character, but it was clear there was an enormous amount of work to do to turn this game around. And I think it required a different approach.
Yeah.
And yet he stuck with it, you know, in that first period of the half. They were the classic manager thing. They were out there a few minutes before Newcastle, you know, they'd been sent out with a message, be ready, be prepared. But it didn't elicit any sort of significant change in the flow of the game.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the difficulty for Arteta was who to take off, because, you know, sometimes it's really obvious that there's a player or maybe even two who aren't at their level, who aren't playing as well as you would expect them to. But I think that was true of Trossard, it was true of Martinelli, it was true of Havertz. It was, I think the midfield was like, it was all right, but like even things like set piece delivery,
from Declan Rice, who's been so good at them. I was just so surprised at how bad his set pieces were, because he took enough of them. Sometimes you can take one or two and it doesn't go your way. But when you've, I don't know, 6, 7 between corners and free kicks, and they're all pretty terrible, I was obviously looking for a change at halftime as well. I thought maybe Nwaneri could come on and maybe try and change the dynamic. He did come on after, I think, about an hour. He brought on Zinchenko and Nwaneri for Martinelli and Merino. It didn't really change very much at all.
No.
Look, this is not criticism of Nwaneri, so just let me make that clear. But he only had 11 touches of the ball in the 30-odd minutes he was on the pitch. For all the excitement and all the potential he has and how excited we are as fans, did this demonstrate maybe that there are reasons why managers are cautious with young players? It's a lot to expect a 17-year-old to come on and completely change the dynamic of a game for Arsenal on a day when collectively the level was so low. For a 17-year-old to come on and elevate that is a lot to ask, even though I was glad he came on the pitch,
Yeah, I think it's a huge ask. And they're not the ideal circumstances in which to have to be using him. But he was probably our best bet of rescuing something from this game. I do think that raises an interesting question about the midfield. And again, as you said, hindsight's 20/20. It's easy to make these points now, but it was quite apparent going into the season that we didn't really have a senior alternative to Martin Odegaard, and I think we've suffered for that. I mean, not just Nwaneri coming on in midfield, but our other sort of swing of trying to get something out of this game in terms of the midfield was pushing Declan Rice into an advanced position. And yes, look, it nearly worked, right? He came close with that one driving run and got on the end of that cross and probably should have scored in the dying moments. But when you're looking to find a way back into a game, when you're looking to find a difference maker, a goal, someone to be creative or produce something out of nothing, I don't think pushing Declan Rice into the advanced areas of midfield feels like a good solution. You know what I mean?
No.
Like, it's not the same as bringing on a true attacking midfielder. And it's hard to look past that, really. I mean, obviously, it's a bit of bad luck to get Odegaard injured, but in his absence, the gap is very obvious, isn't it?
It sort of speaks to the way the squad has been built,
Yeah,
where,
coming back to our point about the lineups in some ways.
Yeah, like, I'm not saying Fabio Vieira was the answer or the solution to the Odegaard problem, but would it not have been better to at least have that? I get he wanted to play, and I get he wanted to leave and go to Porto, but I do think in a summer where you let Smith Rowe and Vieira go, you leave yourself open to the risk of being damaged if something happens to Odegaard, which which happened. We were unlucky, maybe, but unlucky with the injury, but not prepared for the consequences of that, which I think is, a question for the manager, I was going to say question for Edu, but probably not anymore. And when Nwaneri at 17 years of age is the only creative midfielder you have, there are questions, and I think it's right to ask those questions. It comes down to this for me. Like, I don't think this Arsenal squad needed Rice, Jorginho and Partey whilst losing both of Smith Rowe and Vieira. I think maybe Merino, it's early days for him, and hopefully he can contribute as we go forward this season. But stylistically, if you were going to group Merino with any of the midfield combinations, for example, you'd put him more alongside Rice or Partey or Jorginho in terms of style, rather than Odegaard or Vieira or Smith Rowe. So we sort of double down on the kind of physical, defensive-ish midfielder rather than filling the gap with another creative player.
Yeah, I wrote recently about this and said it's almost like an antithesis of the sort of archetypal Arsene Wenger transfer window, where everyone was saying, you need a centre-half, you need a defensive midfielder, and he would buy another number 10.
Yeah.
And, you look at this summer and you think probably we needed an 8-10 figure, and we bought, a defender and I guess a more utilitarian midfield player. I don't mean any of this to be critical.
No.
Marino.
I get it, but that's exactly a great way of describing him, I think.
Yeah. I think he'll be a really useful player, and I think he's got a clear role. I just think that the balance isn't quite there.
Yeah.
And we're suffering for that at the moment. And I think it's interesting as well, looking at the subs he made, but also the subs he didn't make. I mean, Raheem Sterling, for example.
Not even a Hail Mary. 5 minutes for Raheem Sterling on a day when we badly needed a goal. To come away from Newcastle with a point on Saturday, I'm not saying we wouldn't have deserved it or did deserve it, but, give yourself every opportunity to do that. Maybe Partey had a problem, and that's why he had to bring Jorginho on, but it felt like an odd sub on a day when you needed a goal to put another defensive midfielder on. Could you not just throw Sterling on, tell Rice to anchor the midfield? Newcastle are going to sit off anyway. Maybe you leave yourself open to a counter-attack, but you give yourself perhaps a better chance of scoring a goal than you do by putting Jorginho on for Partey, which is like for like, in terms of position, And even, Gabriel Jesus, when he came, I think Trossard was really poor. Havertz was everybody played poorly. The team played poorly. Individuals played poorly. But, someone like Gabriel Jesus, who's off the back of a goal in midweek, I know it was in the EFL Cup. I know it was against Preston. But where,
Get him up there. Is that what you're saying?
Just get him involved.
In the box.
And I know Newcastle made it difficult for us. I think the Newcastle defence played better than I thought they were going to. To be fair, the two fullbacks were very good on the day, and they protected two central defenders who've not been in good form of late. I think those two, much as I hate to credit the opposition, I think deserve credit on the day because they kept our wide options quiet. Towards the end, what did we do? Give the ball to Bukayo Saka, who throughout the day was doubled up on. Joe Linton got back all the time to help. What's the left back's name? Lewis?
Yeah.
Really gave him a hand. Even so, Saka was able to create what was probably our best chance on the day with a cross to the back post. Declan Rice, I think, absolutely should score that goal. We nick a point. We lick our wounds. We say that wasn't very good. But, somehow he's contrived to miss from fucking 6 yards out. I mean, it's a bad miss.
It is, yeah. I think it almost looks like he's not expecting it to get to him. There's a couple of people in the way. That's no excuse. You should be expecting, anticipating that ball, and he should absolutely score there. Couple of other moments. There was one for Trossard at the back post on a corner. The ball sort of dropped him. And we got a goal. Who was it against?
Leicester.
Yeah, right. We got a goal like that. Not too long ago, just sort of side-footing it back across goal and getting the break, but not this time. And it's a defeat, and it's a damaging defeat. I think, you look at it in the context of our Premier League season. I think, is it 3 games without a win, consecutive defeats in away games. Obviously Man City go on and lose on the day, which maybe puts a slightly different hue on things, but not a good day for Arsenal at all. And worrying performance and a worrying result as well.
Yeah. How do you view it sort of in the overall context of this season?
Yeah.
Is it... I don't know how you explain a day as bad as that, because, for all the chat of team selection, I think this is a group of players that are, capable of a lot better, for sure. We saw last season, I know that, a lot of that was with Martin Odegaard in the team, but,
I'm not sure even he could have elevated us out of that kind of performance. The paucity of any creativity, I don't want to say desire, because that's not true, because, you know, players don't go out there and not try. But it's really difficult to explain why a team can just be that bad on one particular day, despite all the preparation, despite the fact they'll be up for a game like this, particularly against Newcastle, especially after what happened there last season. There would have been a desire to get some measure of revenge. Maybe Mikel Arteta didn't put up the right tweet in the dressing room, whatever it was. You know, but it's hard to explain, isn't it, why a team that is capable of so much more played quite as badly as they did, especially on a day where I don't think Newcastle were particularly great themselves. They didn't cause us too many problems. They worked hard. I think there was a stat doing the rounds, wasn't there? Maybe I sent it to you on WhatsApp about duels that we won or didn't win. It was from Opta. Let me just find it here. Arsenal won just 43% of their duels against Newcastle. I know it doesn't all come down to duels, but I think you can look at a performance and see when one team is I was going to say working harder, but maybe working more effectively than the other. And I think Newcastle worked more effectively than we did.
Yeah, and as we said at the top, that's where they thrive. And the way that we could hurt them was by dominating the ball and by, you know, having possession, keeping the ball, moving it well. We didn't do enough of that. So how do I feel about it in context of the season? I don't feel great about it. It's always hard, whenever you lose a game, particularly one that maybe you're not necessarily expecting to lose, you have to stop yourself from going in too hard. But I do think, and I'm trying to be as rational as possible about this, I do think that some sort of chickens came home to roost. Is that a phrase?
Yes.
Cool. Is it chickens or birds?
Chickens. It doesn't matter.
Some sort of aviary animal, right? Came back to
chickens.
Us.
It's chickens.
It's chickens. Thanks, man. Because I think that if you look at the Bournemouth game, you know, the analysis was all about the sending off, and rightly so. But we weren't very good before that, in my opinion.
I agree. I think most people would agree, but of course, it's skewed by
and it gets lost.
The red card, yeah.
And I think that there are a few warning signs, basically, that this was coming. I think a few things that weren't quite right in the balance of the team, the setup of the team. I think we'd sort of muddled through without Odegaard for a bit, but I think now we're really feeling the pinch, and I think it's concerning because I think we've got a really hard week this week as well. Inter away. I think Chelsea away will be a much tougher game than it has been in recent seasons. I think they look better than they have. They've got a lot of good players, that's for sure. And they seem to be getting some sort of tune out of them now. So, I worry about where this leaves us and what it might mean. Yeah.
I was looking for this game to be sort of like going into this week, the kind of game that if we win it, it gives you that little bit of momentum and confidence going to Inter. And if you can go there and get a good result, you're sort of bolstered and you're going into the game at Stamford Bridge. But I think we go into Wednesday in not a great state.
I think this was the easiest game of the three, to be honest, on paper. I know it's not straightforward going to St James's Park, but this is the one where I thought, right, hopefully we can get 3 points there because, as I said, this isn't the Newcastle.
Yeah. Do you think we've sort of reached our limit in a way? And I don't mean that we can't get better, and I don't mean that we're not capable of any more than we've done in the last couple of seasons, but in this current iteration of Arsenal without Martin Odegaard, without any kind of creative fulcrum in midfield, that what he has tried to do to win games
is now not working. Therefore, something has to change. And whether that's Martin Odegaard coming back in or something else, it feels to me like he's sort of... what was that clip doing the rounds? Was it from Zinchenko's book about the lemons? Did you see that?
I didn't see that.
Well, I think it was the lads on Football Ramble who were talking about it, and it might have been a thing from Zinchenko's book where he's talking about an exercise Arteta did where he made them all squeeze lemons, and then he...
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And then he came over to someone and said, "Is that it?" And he squeezed it and said, "You can always get a little bit more from the lemon." Something like that, anyway. Is our lemon completely fucking squeezed at this point with this setup and with this tactical plan?
Maybe. I mean, I do think we're talking a lot about Odegaard's absence, and rightly so, but I think Calafiori's is pretty significant as well. I know we have 50 left backs, so it's sort of seen as less of a factor. But when we're talking about creativity and build up and ball progression and moving between lines, clearly he did a lot of that for us. And clearly as well, Arteta isn't entirely convinced about any of his other options in that position. So I think it's not to make an excuse for the performance, but I think it's a factor. But I am starting to have a kind of nagging worry that, at the end of last season, we have a lot of chats about like how do you recover from 2 seasons where you get so close and don't quite get over the line?
Yeah.
And I even asked Mikel Arteta about it, I think on the final day of the season. And he did his classic thing of being like, sort of metaphorically putting his fingers in his ears and going, la, 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 la. Like he hates any sort of negativity piercing the environment that he's creating. And rightly so. I think he basically was just like, no, we don't allow any room for those thoughts, or, we have to only focus on the future. But I do wonder if after that, and after a start to the season where fatigue has been a factor and it has felt as if things have been going against them, I do wonder if we're looking at a group that maybe for the first time in a couple of years, certainly, are just a little bit, like you say, the lemon's been squeezed. Yeah,
we had a load of questions about this. I had one here from Callum on the Discord. We might as well do it now, seeing as we're talking about it. He says, are we just absolutely knackered? 2 exhilarating and exhausting unsuccessful title challenges, Euros in the summer, injuries stretching the squad and playing huge swathes with 10 men. Are we just physically and emotionally exhausted? And the result at Newcastle reflects that as much as anything else. Well, the performance at Newcastle might reflect that. He doesn't and won't countenance the idea of players having excuses, Arteta, because he talks about we can't use injuries as an excuse, and if we want to win the title, having come so close, well, we've got to pick ourselves up and do better. But there is human nature at this as well, and I think the other thing is that when you're playing well and when you're winning games, you don't really feel the tiredness in your legs. But as soon as things go a little bit the other way, the fatigue seeps in, and decisions that you make on the pitch, which are usually good, aren't quite so good. I think there may well be something to that. And I'm not, again, making any excuses, but I'm just trying to understand why it is this particular team, which has so many good players, which came within a whisker of winning the title last season, looks a sort of shadow of itself at this moment in time. Like, it can change, and it can change very quickly, and it needs to change very quickly. No two ways about it. But right now, they look like they need something. It's not comparable to the season where Emile Smith-Rowe came into the team. It's not comparable. That run, or the run we're on, is not the same by any means. But that introduction of something fresh helped spark the team back into life. And it's hard not to think that that's kind of what we need now. How exactly he does that, though, that is the big question.
Well, also, I wonder, is Mikel Arteta a manager who needs an Emile Smith-Rowe or a Martin Odegaard. You know, for all his positional, tactical brilliance, and I don't think he'd be unique in this. You know, it's not really intended as a criticism, but in order to give to have a truly balanced, complementary team, he has in the past shown that there have been some evidence to suggest that sometimes he needs a kind of creative maverick player to unlock that. And it was Smith-Rowe, and then it was Martin Odegaard. And right now we don't have either of those players. And when I look at our midfield, I'm not sure I see it. I guess Trossard is maybe, you know, the closest thing in the starting 11 to that at the present point in time, but he's not that really. And he had a bad game, right, on Saturday. The only other thing I would say is I think we also have to... I'm really down about Saturday, and it was bad, right? There's no getting away from that. But our standards have raised substantially. I mean, in the sort of pantheon of bad Arsenal away performances over the last even 5 years, I don't think this one is right up there.
It just feels more acute because, you know, we have been so good. So when you put in a stinker like that, you know, we've lost games and we haven't played well, and we are capable of dropping a real stinker of a performance. You know, I think back to Fulham away last year, took the lead, went behind, really couldn't get ourselves back into that game or get anything from that game. It is possible for this team to play poorly and lose games and respond and come back quickly, but it does feel like this is like a cumulative effect on performance levels rather than just one bad day in a season where, for the most part, we're doing more than enough to win most of our games. You know, how many games did we win last season? 28. Is that right? I think so.
Feels right. Yeah, and the stakes are so high as well. I think we're especially conscious of that after everything we've been through. Every point is precious, and every defeat hurts because, you know, we know that it makes it difficult for us to do what we want to do. And, you know, I think there was an interesting case made at the end of last season that maybe Arsenal's downfall was in the games where they didn't score. And this is another game where we didn't score, you know, and
I think we're circling back to the midfield issue again, where, you know, I think everybody can have a conversation about a striker. Everybody can have a conversation about a winger if they want. And I think those are perfectly valid conversations to have. But if your forwards or non-existent forwards aren't getting any service from further behind them, then that's another issue as well that I think needs to be solved. Like the question about, did Arsenal need a number 9? Like, should we have gone and got Sesko in the summer? Maybe Sesko plays in this game. But if Sesko's not getting any delivery from anyone because of the way we're playing behind him, makes no fucking difference, does it?
No. I do think that is what I'm more inclined to look at. You know, I know the concession of the goal, you could point out moments of sloppiness here or there, but if you go away from home in the Premier League, you might concede a goal to a brilliant cross and a brilliant finish. But are we doing enough at the other end? Certainly not in this game. And when that's the case, you know, there's always a chance you're going to end up on the losing side. So it was definitely a low point, and I'm sort of, with a tough week to come, I think it's quite a delicate moment. Because for the last 2 seasons, we've sort of had the dubious pleasure of having a title race that's kind of sustained us across that entire campaign, certainly right up until the end. In both instances, and a couple more defeats for us in the league, and I think that becomes very difficult to sort of rationally think is still on the cards, and then I think your perception sort of game by game begins to shift, and the mood of a fan base can
shift very quickly, can't it?
It can. Expectations are higher, and justifiably.
There's a lot of uneasiness, I think, because of how we've been playing this season. And like we've said, there are reasons for some of those performances. And I don't think you can look beyond the fact that this is a post-tournament summer as well. We had a lot of players away right to the end of the Euros. Saka, Rice, Saliba, David Raya, not so much, obviously, because he didn't really play for Spain. But it does have an impact, and then injuries and red cards and suspensions and those things don't help. But yeah, he's got to try and make sure that this last week is a blip, because I think every team, more or less, has a blip at some point during the season.
Yep. Certainly had one in December last year.
Yeah,
didn't we?
This has got to be our blip now. And the challenge, of course, is to get yourself going again and get yourself performing, because there's 2 very big away games this week, starting on Wednesday against Inter Milan and then Chelsea on Sunday. So they need to pick themselves up and get going again, because otherwise going into the next international break is going to be, there's going to be a lot of introspection. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, did the results elsewhere do anything for your mood? I mean, obviously City...
I mean, that's
lost.
good. I'm glad
Invincibles
they lost.
Day, etc.
Yeah, I'm glad they lost, obviously. That's good. It did make me feel slightly better. I was sitting at home on Saturday watching the Brighton-Liverpool game as well, and Brighton probably should have scored a load of goals in the first half, and then Liverpool scored a couple of quick ones in the second half and won the game. So that didn't make me feel particularly great. But maybe the City loss, is a slight safety net to my mood anyway.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it kind of only is if it's indicative of more struggles to come. Like, for me, whenever City lose, City being City, you just feel like you've got to be making up those points.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
No, I know what you mean, but
But yeah, I guess better that they lost than that they didn't.
For sure. Otherwise, I think we'd be, in big trouble in terms of the title race.
Yeah, and Liverpool going great guns. Going great guns. Even though I still think City are a stronger side than them. But, we've had very different fixture lists to them. That is true, and that is some worthwhile mitigation.
All right, well, look, let's see what Mikel Arteta does and says for the Inter Milan game. Obviously, that's a chance to sort of do it in a different competition, and maybe that might give us the spark that we need going into Chelsea on Sunday. All right, we'll take a little break here, and we will come back with your questions and more on the Edu situation right after this. Welcome back to the Arsecast Extra. This is part 2 of the show where we answer the questions that you sent to us on threads at Gunnerblog and at Arseblog. Also on the Arseblog Discord chat server, which you get access to if you are an Arseblog member on Patreon. There is only one place to start this part of the show, because we've already said that that's what we're going to do. But a couple of questions. John Foster on the Discord. Morning, chaps. Edu, what are your thoughts? Bouncy Sean, wondering if James has any insight into what's happening around Edu. And loads of other people talking about Edu, who it looks like is going to leave the club. What do we understand about, not so much where he's going to go next, because there's, stories linking him with Nottingham Forest. And I've got a piece with thanks to Filippo Clare from August, a news story from the Brazilian press which says Nottingham Forest and Olympiacos owner wants to take Edu Gaspar from Arsenal. What do we understand about why this is happening rather than where he might go?
Well, because it's Edu's decision at this point in time. He is a guy who, I think if you look at his career, has been quite a career-oriented individual. He had the role with Corinthians, then he went to the Brazilian national team setup. That gave him the credentials to come in somewhere like Arsenal. He's gone technical director to sporting director. And from the bits and pieces I've heard, what he's being offered at this point in time, he sees as a progression. We may not see it like that as Arsenal fans, but I think going from a role where he's kind of overseeing one club to a kind of multi-club network model with a kind of true international feeling to it, I think is probably, he sees that as his next step. I don't doubt as well he'll be very well rewarded for something like that, because his work at Arsenal has been eye-catching. I mean, we've debated at times the recruitment or his role in it, but by and large, externally, I think he's been here, 5.5 years. Is that right? 2019?
2019, yeah. He came in, in that sort
I think that the club's trajectory in that period reflects well on him.
Sure.
And his standing now is probably very good. He even won an award, didn't he? Some sort of award. He was the golden boy or something, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was top director lad.
Yes, exactly. They give you a golden model of a technical director on their phone, a little statuette.
Of Ralph.
So I think, so all that said, I guess that would be kind of the rationale from his side.
I mean,
all that said, it does feel a bit odd, doesn't it?
It does. The multi-club thing he's going into right now is Olympiacos and Nottingham Forest.
Well, lest we forget, Andrew, Nottingham Forest are currently third.
No, I'm not dismissing Nottingham Forest. I just mean that, it might suggest that Marinakis is planning on expanding his collection of clubs, because with all due respect to both Nottingham Forest and Olympiacos, if I'm Edu, I'm at Arsenal, one of the biggest clubs in the world, in one of the best cities in the world, it's kind of a dream job. You're sporting director. You've got the responsibility for the men's team, the women's team, the academy team. It's a very interesting role. Is it possible that within the job that he has at this moment in time, he might feel that his influence over certain aspects of the club aren't quite what he wants, therefore an opportunity elsewhere? This is just me speculating, by the way. Is that potentially part of what's going on here? And where does it leave Arsenal? Because you're then losing the guy who, nominally at least, is responsible for the men's team, the women's team, and the academy team at a point in time as well, let's not forget, where the women's team is looking for a manager.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fair to speculate about that, just because I think this does seem strange, and particularly the timing of it. If you think about Arsenal over the last few years, one of the kind of central themes of everything they've done has been that sort of unity, right?
Yeah.
Between the executives and the board. And it's really felt like a team effort with everyone pulling in the same direction. And I think Edu's been a really important part of that. And I think his interpersonal skills probably have been part of what helped that function. So for someone, obviously Vinay stepped away, right, at the end of last season. But I think a lot of people saw that coming potentially. It didn't necessarily come as a huge surprise, and there was a significant notice period, etc. I think this news about Edu breaking this morning will, shock quite a lot of Arsenal fans. I think it, for a lot of people, you could probably speak to this. Do you feel like this has come a bit out of the blue?
Yeah, for sure, because when did Arteta sign his contract? In the last international break.
Yeah.
And there's a picture of him and Edu, and they always seem to have a good relationship.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying they don't have a good relationship now. That's not what I'm saying. It just felt like this was, very harmonious behind the scenes. And maybe it is harmonious. Maybe it's just a career decision. But it is surprising. And it is surprising that we don't know exactly when it's going to happen. But I think based on what we're seeing, it feels like it's imminent rather than something like, well, Edu's going to step away at the end of the season. It feels like it's something that's going to happen now. And with January looming, you have to wonder what it means for for Arsenal and, how we're going to operate, if at all, in the January transfer window?
Yeah. I don't know the timings. I have to be honest about that. I don't know what sort of notice period Edu might have in his agreement with Arsenal. It wouldn't surprise me if, we end up in a kind of gardening leave situation where, maybe he doesn't actually turn up at Forest until the end of the season, but, for obvious reasons, doesn't continue in his role at Arsenal.
Yeah.
I think the whole sort of politics of it is fascinating. I mean, yes, there are probably millions of reasons that Edu might want to take this role, in a nice big briefcase. I think he'll be really well paid, probably. He'll probably be going into a sort of Premier League manager level salary, which is not what a technical director or a sporting director typically makes. Because for the Forest Group, it will be an enormous coup. And, they'll be landing a guy with a huge reputation in global football. I do think if everything was hunky-dory at Arsenal, we might not be here. I do think that our club model and club structure has been in a bit of flux in the last few years. And I think that the way that some of that flux is resolving might not be ideal for Edu. Maybe his power is not quite as far reaching as his title would suggest. And we know, look, Edu and Mikel Arteta have a great personal relationship, but I think we know that this is a club that is being built primarily around Mikel at this point in time. And I've lost count. How many times have you read an Athletic piece written by me that, when we signed a player, Mikel Arteta was the decision maker?
Adamant that this is the player he wanted.
Yeah. And look, that's not to downplay Edu's role and say it's not a collaborative decision. But I do think we are evolving or have evolved into a club that maybe is a bit more manager-led. And for a guy who's by trade a sporting director, maybe that's not ideal.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, people might worry about that.
Would they? I mean, I think everyone thinks Mikel Arteta is great, don't they? And he makes good decisions. But for the most part, I mean, it's hard. It's like if you've got a great manager, you want to make sure you give them what they want. Is one argument, right?
Yeah, I get that. But I think there also needs to be, checks and balances. Not every idea that a great manager has is a great idea, know? And I think the dynamic maybe of having somebody like Edu or somebody else in that role, I mean, it's very likely and I think necessary that Arsenal fill that role with somebody. Now, whether that's somebody who is Mikel Arteta's pick or somebody on the board might pick somebody, I don't know. But there is a lot of work to do in that role, right? Above and beyond whatever the influence the manager has, because like we said, we're talking about somebody who's responsible ultimately for the men's team and the women's team and the academy. And I know there are other people in situ, Per Mertesacker, for example, and Claire Wheatley on the women's side. And I understand managers who want what they want, but I do wonder about that dynamic, when it became an issue when that situation was present at Arsenal before with Arsene Wenger, who was a great manager and who won a lot, but who maybe had too much power over the decision-making. And look, I'm not saying that Mikel Arteta is going to make all terrible decisions or anything like that, but I just feel like for a modern football club to be... I just think you need those checks and balances, that's all.
Yeah. I suppose what I would, to throw it forward, if this all comes to fruition, Edu leaves, what sort of appointment do you imagine Arsenal making? Do you know what I mean? And do you think Mikel Arteta would have a hand in that?
Oh, yeah.
Or would it be someone that, is hired specifically to work with Mikel? I would kind of envisage yes. So I think that the direction of travel to a kind of Arteta-centric structure is likely to continue.
Yeah, I mean, it does.
And I do think we need to be sort of careful with this, because I think framing it as a sort of big power struggle would be probably an unfair thing. Like I say, Edu's got his own reasons for doing what he's doing. But I do think that it's interesting, right? I do think we have shifted a little bit.
Yeah, are we in the same kind of territory as Arsene Wenger choosing Ivan Gazidis? I know it's not quite the same, but that level of influence over who comes in. I mean, is it possible that Mikel Arteta could say, this is exactly what I want from a person in this role, and that we might be able to improve, which is no slight on Edu?
Yeah. Listen, I think Edu, with respect, his track record is mixed. There's a reason I say externally this period at Arsenal reflects really well on him, because I think us who follow it day in, day out in minute detail would maybe have a bit more debate over some of the recruitment or what his role in it has been. So I don't think Edu is perfect by any means. And his departure opens up possibilities, right? Yeah. In terms of what Arsenal could do. I mean, you'll remember when Edu first came in, he laid off a team of scouts, and that was framed widely in the media as a disaster. How can Arsenal progress? They've got no scouts. And the department that he rebuilt has since been credited with some of the best recruitment work in European football in some instances. So change is always an opportunity as well. So I think that's important to consider. Do I think that Mikel would be granted anything like that kind of power that Arsene was? I think no. But I do think that the man who effectively runs the club is the vice chairman, Tim Lewis. And I think he has a great relationship with Mikel, and he has Mikel's ear. So I'd be very I can't see a situation where we make an appointment that Mikel isn't on board with.
Sure,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, but let me. I know there's more to it, but with all due respect to Tim Lewis, who has spent most of his career working as a lawyer, what way is he best placed to decide who comes in as sporting director at Arsenal? Is there a process? Are there people, who are going to be involved in that decision, or how's that going to work?
Yeah, I mean, you'd imagine Richard Garlick as well. The MD, he's got experience in football at West Brom and in the Premier League, so he's more from a football background, will be heavily involved. The board themselves, I think, would have to be involved in an appointment of this level. So that would bring in people like Josh. But yeah, it's a big call. It's a big call. And I don't think we can not replace Edu. I think that would be a really bad move, in my opinion, to just be like, we can forgo this role. I think the structure depends on it, and whether you go back to more of a technical director and you limit some of those responsibilities regarding the academy and the women's team to not create overlap, maybe.
Yeah,
but I think we need somebody who's leading that recruitment team, and I think Edu is going to be a miss because he is different to a lot of other people at Arsenal. He is highly personable.
Yes.
Incredibly charming. He is kind of the... What?
It's just the way you said. He's very different from a lot of people at Arsenal. He's highly personable and very charming, which talk about damned with faint praise.
Well, I know. I just mean...
I know what you mean. It's just the way it came out.
Yes. He's sort of the... I don't know, the human face, I guess, on these transfer deals, right? Sure. Arsenal can be difficult negotiators and hard negotiators, and as I've said many times, we're a club run by lawyers, but Edu he greases the wheels.
Sure.
Right?
I mean, you do need somebody who's got those connections and who's got those relationships.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fascinating to see what they do and who it might be and where they come from. It doesn't feel like the sort of role you can just, we'll see who, stick something up on the notice board in the canteen and see who's, up for this.
Yeah. I mean, we like to promote internally, don't we? And we do have an assistant sporting director in Jason Ato, who's played a big role in everything that's happened over the last few years. Ordinarily, you might look at that and say, well, the Arsenal thing to do would be to give him the job. I just don't know if that will quite cut it. I think for a start, he's very close with Edu, and Edu may want to take him wherever he goes. But also, is this a role where you need that kind of clout that Edu had as a kind of name in world football? I don't know. Maybe you go a different route. Maybe you go more data-led. Maybe you go more scouting-led. You don't lean so much on the relationship dynamic. But I think you can't underestimate the value that Edu has brought in that respect. And yeah, I think that was his real skill set. Apart from managing people, I think he's very good at that, keeping people happy, managing a team. His ability to build relationships has been critical to Arsenal.
Well, it is a bit of a shock. And I think, the fact it's come after a difficult week.
It's bad timing, I think.
The timing isn't great, it's fair to say.
And there are still unknowns. Like, as I say, I don't know what the notice period will be. I don't know if Arsenal will bend over backwards to try and make Edu stay. But from everything I hear, it appears his decision has been made. And there's, as you say, you mentioned a news story in Brazil from a few months back, and there has been chat about this in the background for some time. So, although as much as it feels like a shock and it feels overnight, I think that's far from the case. I think he's been courted for quite a long time.
So, but would that have been well known internally at Arsenal, that if it was reported in the Brazilian press, if it was being whispered, and I saw a few people talking about that rumor over the last couple of days before this news broke this morning. I didn't really pay it any attention, to be honest. But would Arsenal be completely blindsided by this, or is it something that maybe they've been aware of in the background?
I think they've been aware for a little bit of time. I think they've sort of, due processes regarding his potential departure that have begun, essentially. So I think they've been aware for a little bit of time. I don't know exactly how long they've known, and I think they'll be disappointed in some respects, because he's been an important part of everything. And I think he's also, it's a bit like Jack. He's kind of a symbolic figure too. He's a connection to a period of the club's history.
Yeah.
And I think as fans, we attach quite a lot to that. It matters that we have an Invincible as part of the decision-making process. I think it gave the organisation some weight with the supporters, and so it's big news. Apart from Mikel going, or the Kroenkes selling up, it's about as big news as we could have.
Certainly at executive level, that's for sure.
Yeah, outside of a transfer window, it's a big deal.
I'm really fascinated to see what the response to this has been, because so far Arsenal are not commenting on this at all, and I think from the outside then, or certainly in a difficult week, as we said, where the timing is not great, people will start to question are the foundations crumbling a little bit. Like we said, there is the opportunity for Arsenal to go and hire somebody who could be really good at this job and who could work very well with Mikel Arteta, and who, maybe one of the criticisms of Edu was that he didn't really sell particularly well, albeit he's leaving after a pretty successful summer in terms of selling players.
which
he is, yeah.
When you look at some of the deals that were done, I think he did pretty well in comparison to some of the deals that we've done in the past. So that was an area that it looked like he was improving on, but how Arsenal show their face on this and how they respond and what sort of message Arsenal put out, because Arteta's got a press conference tomorrow night in Milan, and inevitably that is going to be one of the questions. Now, it's just it's well within the realms of possibility that Mikel Arteta will say, I can't talk about that, because he does that quite a lot.
I can envisage that happening, yeah.
Yeah, but it is still important that Arsenal demonstrate that they're capable of responding to what's, I guess, a bit of a setback or a little bit of a surprise off the pitch as well as on it.
Absolutely. It's going to be a massive topic of discussion. And I think the timing is interesting as well, as it comes at a point where I think a lot of eyes right now are on our summer transfer business, as they were, to be fair, at this point 12 months ago. We have to offer that context and say, we've been here before where things aren't quite clicking and we're looking at what we did in the market and saying, oh, was it the right way to go? And it worked out okay. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I think people are looking at the incoming business in a slightly different light and potentially looking at the manager's role within that, and saying, I think we can say with some confidence that Marino, for example, was somebody Mikel really wanted, and that the club initially had some reservations,
Yeah.
Same with Calafiori. I mean, I don't think anyone's got any complaints about his quality, but certainly there were concerns about his reliability in terms of his fitness. And so, the timing is interesting, isn't it? In that, people are casting an eye over it and being like, well, if there is any blame to be apportioned, how is it apportioned? But it could all change. It could all change so quickly. I think Edu's had real ups and downs. That's the thing. I think there have been good points and bad points and definite low points, signings that we did not like or enjoy, many of which overlapped with previous administration under Ralston. But maybe he's been smart here. Maybe he has looked at where his stock is right now.
Yeah. And
thought, this is the time for me to capitalise on that and take the next step. It leaves us with a lot of questions.
It certainly does. And, a lot of questions and not very much information. So we'll have to wait and see what emerges over the coming days, because this is a very, very big story, a big development at Arsenal. So we'll wait and see what the club say, how they respond, and what the plan is in due course. And just hope that it isn't another thing that sort of destabilizes the team at a time where we're looking for a bit of stability. This feels like, a difficult one, because I'm sure, as you said, and I've met Edu and you've met Edu, and he is a really nice guy, absolutely full of charm and personality, as you said. I'm sure he's a very popular guy with the players as well.
For sure, yeah.
Many of whom he would have been involved in bringing to the club. So, yeah, we'll have to just wait and see what that has, or what sort of impact that has going forward. For now, though, we better move on. We'll do a couple of quick questions to just see us out here. Here's one from Threads from Risha Badaga. I think that it is. I can't pronounce that. I apologize. Anyway, he says, do you think a lack of pace is the reason we've struggled this season? All the other teams seem to have wingers, forwards, fullbacks who use their pace to try and get in behind all the time. Well, we don't generally try and do that, except for our two wingers, Saka and Martinelli. We don't really have any pace and relying more on headers from crosses or set pieces. You hardly ever see our players going through one-on-one. Have other teams been able to figure out a way to manage our threat?
I think we do have players that run in behind. Saka and Martinelli mentioned. I think Kai Havertz runs in behind. I think the bigger issue is probably finding ourselves in situations where that can work to our benefit. I mean, in order to run in behind into space, we need to be on the counter-attack, really. We need to be capitalising on transition moments. Because what we normally find is a team sitting in a low block against us, and you're not going to play people through one-on-one in that situation easily. I do think we need more of it, though. Like we talked about Sterling not coming on. I think this squad clearly really needs one or maybe even two wide forwards. Sterling didn't get on. Jesus did get on, but one goal this calendar year. I'm sorry, but those are the facts. We need something else there. And Trossard, I think increasingly we're seeing him used in central areas. And I think there are reasons for that, because he's not really that sort of player to stretch the defence running behind. So, yeah, I think it's something that needs addressing. What do you think?
I don't think it's like the only problem, or I don't think it's the main reason, but I do think it's something that we need. Talked about this a lot during the summer. I'm sitting here right now weeping a solitary tear down my face over someone like Pedro Neto going to Chelsea. I understand. I understand the hesitation and the caution maybe over his injury record, but looking at the Premier League over the last couple of years, there isn't a player I would have rather had at Arsenal because of his ability to play on both sides as well, and just that sort of blinding pace. We've had this discussion before, I think, but when people think about pace, there's often this idea, right, who's the guy who's going to streak through from the halfway line to get in behind and go around the goalkeeper and score one-on-one, whereas I think another aspect of pace is your ability to burst past players in short spaces, which I think he is able to do. And we don't really have that player beyond maybe Bukayo Saka, sometimes Martinelli, and the other way we do it is with an overlap from Ben White. And that's about the only time we really demonstrate any kind of pace. And I think you can have pace in the final third, even when you are playing against a low block. So I do think that's job number one for whoever's the new technical director for January.
Yeah.
Sort that out, Tim Lewis.
Have you got another one? I've been so busy this morning with the news that I've barely looked at these questions. So if you have got another one, feel free to chuck it at me.
Do I have another one? Boom, boom, boom. We had a question about the Crystal Palace game and the schedule, but I don't know what the answer is to that.
Okay. I like this from Gaza, who said, "Can we go to Dubai, please?"
Yeah, a lot of
calls for Dubai.
Yeah, quick trip to Dubai, or get everyone around to Ben White's house. He can, let them have a go on the sunbed. Get all that vitamin D.
Yeah.
Do I have more? There was just a lot of questions about stuff we've already talked about. What about this one from Macho Grande 1 on Threads? We'll do this one and we'll finish up and get this podcast out. Why is Arteta so wedded to Martinelli on the left and Saka on the right? Are we too predictable? Why can't we try Saka right 8, switch Martinelli to right wing, play Jesus from the left, subtle tweaks, even if it's only for 20 minutes, to give the opposition a different look or a different problem, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned that moment in the first half where Trossard nearly played Saka in.
Yeah.
It really struck me that you don't see Bukayo Saka in that position too often, like running right through the middle of the pitch. And I suddenly thought, wow, that would be great if we could do that more frequently. Like, I think that is kind of the next step in his development, to get into areas you would normally associate with more of almost a centre forward at times. I think there's something to that. If you think about how much positional rotation there is in our own half, I sometimes feel like we're a little bit too structured in the opponent's half. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like our left back turns up at right back sometimes, or, Thomas Partey's playing right back but stepping into midfield. But it feels like there's such a desire to kind of keep the width that we can almost play a bit more in our lanes. It goes back to when Arteta first started out, we had a very rigid 5 lanes of attack. Do you remember? But we've moved away from that. We're certainly more fluid than we used to be. But I think there's still a way to go on that.
Yeah, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, did we? Where we just felt like the team could do with a bit more, I think you used the word maverick in attack. That when the prescribed motions and movements and patterns of play don't come off, we do feel a little bit pedestrian, as we did on Saturday against Newcastle. I mean, there was a question. Let me see if I can find it. I think it was on. Master Johnbury on the Discord. James said on the whistle. You know what I'm talking about, that video thing you do after the games.
Yeah.
He thinks Arteta should change something for the next match because this isn't working. What do you both think he should do to turn things around? And there was another
I don't know. That's the hard bit.
That's the hard bit.
That's why they pay him the big bucks.
Yeah. Sell Tickle My Arsenal said, if you were Arteta, what's the one change you would make to kick us back into gear? He says, I feel like getting Timber on the right and a proper left back to support Saka and Martinelli, and we'll be back to being dangerous again.
Yeah, I think I'd go with Timber or White at right back and get Partey back in midfield. I know I've been calling for Nwaneri to play, but I sort of have reservations now. I think, A, the games are so big, and B, it feels like you're asking him to fix too much, as you suggested, at 17 years old.
Yeah.
But I'd get Partey back into the midfield and maybe try one of the many left backs we have. I'd be quite close to giving Lewis Skelly a game, honestly.
I would be too. And that might be insane if we've just said we're not going to play Nwaneri.
No, he's 18 though, crucially.
Yeah.
He's a grown man. No, I just think if you've got issues with Zinchenko and you've got issues with Kivior, I think he's done really pretty well whenever he's been called upon. And I think that's a position, an area of the pitch where maybe it's a little bit more manageable to have a young player there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like the responsibility is less on him. I think when you're putting Nwaneri and saying, right, create stuff, I think that's a different ask.
Yeah, but you're asking Lewis Skelly defend against top-class wingers. I mean, let me put it to you like this. If it was just like a Hobson's choice tomorrow between Zinchenko and Lewis Skelly, who are you picking?
I think I'm going for Zinchenko just. Yeah, just. You?
I would go with Lewis Skelly.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, I mean, like I say, I'm nearly there. And I think a lot of people will be there. Whether Mikel is, well, I think we sort of think he is, based on some of his choices this season. Right?
Yeah.
He's got to be close to that point. And other things they could do, I think I would restructure the team slightly and have Havertz as the focal point, proper number 9.
Yeah.
I think in the past we've learned we're better like that.
Apparently Havertz and Trossard made no passes to each other in the Newcastle game.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of one of the issues, really, that Havertz is not a ball player, really. He's not a guy who's going to be passing the ball. And I think we're asking him to do a lot of Martin Odegaard sort of stuff, and that just isn't his game.
No, I agree.
So, yeah, I'd get him up top properly and sort of work back from there.
Beyond that, what can you do other than hope Martin Odegaard is fit and ready to go?
Yeah, it's not that far away by all accounts.
Potentially in the squad for Inter, we've heard. That's what Martin Keown said on TV the other day. Martin Keown, I apologise.
Yeah.
Yes, so we'll see. I think that will be a boost, but it's also, a situation we're going to have to manage. It's not like Odegaard can come back and play 3 games a week, between now and May and be brilliant in all of them. I think.
And frankly, if he can be in the squad for Milan, that would obviously be wonderful. But I think at this point in time, Chelsea's actually a bigger game. Yeah. We've got ourselves into a pretty healthy position in the Champions League. Our position in the league, I think, feels a bit more precarious.
Yes.
And that's going to be a tough match. It's going to be a tough match.
Sure is. Okay, well, look, if you want to hear a bit more about the weekend's Premier League action, not much of it was great, but Man City did lose at least. You can join myself and Phil over on Patreon. A little later on, we'll have an episode of The 30 for you. It's patreon.com/Arseblog. And of course, we'll preview the Inter Milan game as well over on Patreon a little later in the week. So for now, take it easy, folks, and we will catch you on the next one.
Bye-bye.